Welcome back to Zane Customs. In this week's episode, I'm going to be upgrading another D&D figure. So, luckily with this D&D figure, I actually have video of me throughout the whole process. So this is the very first thing I did. I just drew out my quick design for the character in Sketchbook. And again, if you watch my previous videos, you'll know this, but if you're just hopping in now, I've been kind of reworking some custom D&D figures I did like a year or two ago. So this drawing is pretty old, and even this video of me sculpting it is also pretty old. I did both these, that drawing and the sculpt right here, on my iPad in an app called Sketchbook, and then right here I'm using an app called Forger. And eventually, when I'll get to the updating phase of the video, I'll move over to Zbrush, but back then the iPad was all I had, so this is all I could really do. And also throughout the resculpting process, I've been trying to do it in order of how I originally did it. So like I did the lion god and then the tree dude, and just try to do that when I went to resculpt them, do it in the same order. This guy was the last one I did. I actually have another guy that I did right before him. But he was giving me a lot of trouble trying to rework him, so I ended up saving him for last and just moving on to this guy. So next week's video will be about him. So this guy was actually the last D&D character I had sculpted at the time, but now I just swapped those two places just because I was having trouble with the other guy, but that guy will be next week's video. So this guy is basically the rogue for the D&D group. That's why he's obviously got a hood and all the stuff, and he's supposed to be sneaky and like a ninja. But he's also, his whole story is basically he's traveling the world to try and find a way to bring someone back to life, someone that's passed away. So that's part of the reason he has the satchel and things, because he's almost like a historian, scientist, like all those things in one. He's just studying every possible thing he can to try and learn different ways, magic systems, whatever he can do to see if he can bring someone back to life. And those were basically the two things I had on this character. He was a rogue, so he needed to be stealthy, and then he was traveling the world to try and bring someone back to life. So you obviously, like as far as design, he's pretty basic. I didn't do a great job. He looks like a basic rogue, and then I just threw in the satchel because I'm like, oh, that's where he's going to carry his books and all the stuff that he needs. So that was my initial thought process, but looking back on it now, it's kind of embarrassing how basic this character is. I think he turned out like okay, considering where I was at the time when I sculpted it. Like I was happy enough with it, I guess, but it didn't turn out great. Like I think the upgrading him definitely made him a lot better. One thing I want to point out, if you look at the tip of his shoes, where his toes would be, it's kind of hard to see because it's moving quick, but it looks like fabric's being pulled or stretched weird there. And that's part of the problem I've mentioned in a lot of videos with polygon stretching and warping. That's what's great about ZBrush. I can just throw it in and then do something called dynameshing, and it'll just reapply an even layer of polygons throughout the whole body, and you won't have weird warping or stretching of polygons or anything. And now, obviously, here I am in ZBrush, and I realized this when I was redoing my first D&D figure. It's so much easier to just basically tear everything down and start from scratch. Not scratch, but like you can't really just try to rework the arms or anything. It's like it's easier to just cut the arms off, like do all these things and just break it down to a lot of different parts, especially with some of these old Forger models, because they're not necessarily symmetrical and they'll have a lot of weird geometry. I found it's just easier to cut pieces off, and then in the case of this model, I actually brought in these two brand new arms rather than trying to reuse the old ones because they were really just terrible. So that's one thing that when I first started doing these, I was trying to use the initial model and just rework from that, but which is possible. It just takes longer, and like I've said in past videos, I had to put out, or at least my goal is to put out one video a week. So that's why a lot of times the I'll mention the sculpts aren't necessarily to my satisfaction, and I'll usually end up working on them later and things like that, just because I only have a week to do them, and sometimes a week's not enough time. Okay, and what I'm doing here is creating his poncho, and you can see I have this flat plane and it's just dropping and falling on him like real cloth. And this is something that's new to me and relatively new to ZBrush. I just recently learned how to use it, and it's like cloth dynamics. And you can basically just throw anything in there and tell it that it's a piece of cloth, and it'll act like cloth. It'll fall, it'll be affected by gravity and all these things, and it will perfectly form around your model and things like that. It's really cool. I don't know that I'll be using it a whole ton. I recently learned about it, and I wanted to try it out just to learn something new. And it's definitely quicker and stuff, but again, I don't know if I'll be using it all the time, but it definitely is a really cool tool. And really nice, again, for me, because I try to put out one sculpt a week, and learning tricks like this in ZBrush, or learning how to texture like this poncho. It looks textured pretty much perfectly, using surface noise, learning all these techniques. It feels a little bit like cheating to me, but kind of realize that it's something I got to do if I want to get my sculpts to look better with the time frame I have. Because again, I try to just give myself a week to do these, so I don't know, I might just end up doing it a lot, because it does look pretty good. And one thing I was really happy with, as far as resculpting him in ZBrush, is being able to actually texture all the fabric and color it. You can texture and color in Forger, but again, like I've said before, it's not a great program. Well, it's a great program, but it's not a powerful program when you compare it to ZBrush, so it can't do nearly as much. And like I said, this character is traveling the world looking for different ways to possibly bring someone back to life. So, you know, in my head, he would be pretty, not necessarily like war torn, but he's gone through a lot, and I wanted this close to kind of reflect that. Like his poncho isn't like a nice piece of clothing that he bought. It's like an old sack that he turned into a poncho for warmth and things like that. And that was always my idea, but it was hard to get that across in Forger, and using ZBrush is so much easier to, like, that looks like a sackcloth that you would have carried potatoes in or something, to me at least. So that's something that is really cool and way easier in ZBrush. And so pretty much the rest of the sculpt is just me going through and fixing up any weird geometry, but mostly just retexturing, or I guess not retexturing because I didn't texture it initially in Forger, but adding a texture to the fabric so it actually looks like fabric and not plastic, and coloring it and things like that. Again, these were my first sculpts ever, so they're pretty basic. I mean, the pose from the drawing to the Forger model was the same pose, and it's super basic. I don't even think I moved the legs or anything at all. I just moved one arm up to have him holding the dagger, so it's super simple. And this looks really weird right here, like he's only got hair growing out of his forehead, but you're not going to see the rest of his head, so I didn't really need to go and add hair to the rest of his head, and I just wanted it poking kind of out of the top of his hood there. But yeah, like I was saying, it's a super simple pose. So and I thought about, when I was doing these D&D resculptures, it'd be cool to, like, obviously completely redo them like I did, but repose them, do all these things. But in the end, I decided it would be cooler, especially like doing side-by-side photos of the original versus what I did now, if they were in a similar pose. With some of them, like the lion guy, if you guys seen the video, he I added legs and things to him, because initially his legs were cut off just because I didn't want to sculpt him at the time, and it was, you know, too hard for me. I added legs and added more to it. So if, you know, I had something like that going on, I would finish out his whole body. But really, I didn't want to change the pose too much, because I wanted it to be the same as what it was. I did change slight things you'll see by the end, but really the only thing I could change is his costume design, and that's one of my funnest things. It's like sketching. If you ever draw and you don't like want to look at a drawing and copy or anything, you just want to sketch something out just out of your mind. That's kind of how I feel doing little details like this. Like once I get the basic sculpt done, at least to a point where I know I like the pose and I'm texturing, coloring, doing all these things, then I'll just go in and start sketching in these little details, and it's one of my favorite parts. And the D&D campaign that these characters all come from, I'm running, so in my head I know how the world works, how the magic system, how all these things work. So I could kind of really create any clothing I want and be like, that's just how this world does shirts, you know? But it's fun to also try and think of like realistically how would this work, like these leather straps wrapping around the back and going to the front to hold the leather vest tight in the front and back, and you know, things that you would probably never really see in real life, but kind of makes sense in my head. Like, yeah, that would, you know, work at least in my head. So doing things like that, but also what's fun about it is, like I said, I created this world so I can kind of do what I want. So having the creative freedom to do anything I want, and also these are original characters between me and whoever's playing these characters in the campaign. So I get pretty much complete creative freedom design-wise. Like when I set up the campaign, I asked them all, like, you get, you know, one weapon, one this, whatever. What kind of race are you? What kind of class are you? What color eyes? All these things. So I knew all that. I knew that my buddy that's playing this character, he wanted white hair and silver eyes and things like that, and he's an elf and certain things like that. But as far as costume design and all that, it's like he's a rogue. Other than that there's no real direction, so I get to come up with everything I want, and it's really fun. Especially, I think I've mentioned this before, but in Zbrush, because you have so much more processing power, you can add so much more detail. Like when I did the lion dude a couple videos back, I added more braids into his hair and just a lot of other small extra details that I think just made it a lot better, brought it together more. And that's probably my funnest part, just adding in these small details afterwards. And one thing I'm actually planning on doing, and this won't be for quite a while, more than likely, but me and my buddy started this D&D campaign again, and it's a pretty long campaign. I got a lot of ideas for it, but I basically wanted to start the campaign and give them these statues, like this is what your character looks like right now at the beginning of this story. And then as we play through, like maybe we get halfway, I'll resculpt their character again and be like, you know, give it to him again and be like, hey, your guy got this magic sword and this throughout the campaign. Let me resculpt him. This is what he looks like now. And just do that throughout the campaign. Every once in a while, give him a new statue and things like that. And I think that's going to be really fun, because for one of the struggles with these characters is I like adding all these small details. So like for this guy, I could add in seams and stitches and all that because that fits his character, but I can't add in armor or anything crazy because it doesn't really make sense story-wise why you would have it. But the farther into the actual campaign we get, and if they get magical items or you know, anything like that, I can add those in, armor, swords, all those things. I'll just slowly add those in over time, and it'll make the sculpts funner and more interesting. But that won't be for a while. So for those of you who are wanting me to get back into Minecraft or superhero sculpts, don't worry, that won't be for a long time. But that is something I do want to do in the future. And here with his messenger bag, I'm doing another one of those cloth dynamic simulations just to try and see if I could use that to have the bag kind of conform to his body and stuff. And it didn't work out very well here. I mean, it looks fine, but it didn't look as good as a poncho. And that's just one thing you got to mess with simulation parameters and stuff to get that stuff to work properly. And one change I did make by the end is I got rid of the knife and added in scrying bones, because the knife didn't have much story connotation, but this character does have scrying bones, and he can throw up, and if they land in the correct orientation with the correct runes, then he can ask questions of the gods he worships and stuff, and things that he actually does in the campaign. Whereas the knife, I would just added in the moment, because I'm like, he's a rogue, he will have a knife, but there was no real reason for it, so I decided to get rid of it. But that's it right there. So just to throw up a few pictures so you can see the drawing and then the second sculpt and the final sculpt. Just kind of check out the whole process. But yeah, thanks for watching. I really super appreciate anybody willing to like, comment, subscribe. We just hit 50 subscribers this last week, so that's pretty awesome. Thanks everybody that took the time to subscribe. I super appreciate it. And if you like what you see, you can also check me out on Instagram or Etsy. Those are both at Zane Customs. Anything that you see me sculpt on here, I sell on Etsy if you want one of these sculpts, so you can check that out there. And I'll have a new video next week. Thanks for watching.